This is the first video in a new series I'm tentatively calling Puzzles in Media. I'll be discussing one scene in the 2022 movie Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery, written and directed by Rian Johnson. I wouldn't call anything in this video a spoiler. I'm only going to be talking about the cold open scene, the first 10 minutes before the title appears. This scene just introduces us to the world and the characters. I won't be talking about any twists or plot developments. I will be revealing the answers to the puzzles in this scene, but I wouldn't call that a spoiler for the movie either because they're not presented in a way that you're expected to be able to solve. But that's my take. If you avoid trailers because you hate any and all spoilers, then don't watch this video before seeing the movie, obviously. Okay? Alright, let's go. 4 characters receive a puzzle box from a courier at the same time, and they solve it together over the phone with this group call montage that cuts back and forth between them. The focus of the scene is not the puzzle itself. Like I said, the main purpose is to introduce us to the characters and how they interact with each other. There's a lot of great character moments. Viewers are not expected to follow the puzzle, certainly not all of it. Most of the action happens way too fast for that. So given that context, I think they did a great job overall. There are some real puzzles here, even though they didn't need to design any real puzzles for the scene to work. There are a couple pieces that I think were not designed as real puzzles. You can really only tell when you break it down and analyze it, which is what we're doing here. Let's start with a quick overview of the puzzle. It starts as a rectangular wooden box with a square top. Looks about 50 by 50 centimeters, and it's about 30 centimeters high. The first puzzle is to find a certain spot on the top and press it, and then 4 leaves on the box open into a larger square. This is what I'm calling the Layer 1 configuration. There are 4 square windows in the top surface. 3 of them have a fine gold mesh screen, and 1 starts open. You have to solve the puzzles in order, and each one opens the next one. The 4th one is a clue to pull up on the center wheel. This causes the box to rearrange itself. The circular disc containing the 4 windows rises up and rotates. When it comes down, it's rotated 45 degrees from where it started. The 4 windows are in a different configuration now, and you have 4 more panels. This is what I'm calling the Layer 2 configuration. So, same deal, 4 puzzles in order. This time when you solve the 4th one, the box closes back up, then opens a different way and delivers the message. That's it, as far as I can tell. There's no meta puzzle. Each puzzle is completely self-contained. The final message itself doesn't seem to have any puzzle content, so I won't even go into that. Here's a diagram of everything, pieced together from a bunch of different shots. We've got the initial puzzle to open the box, and then 8 individual puzzles in these square panels. The locations of the puzzles with respect to each other is consistent between different props. You always go clockwise around the board. However, the orientation of each puzzle within its window is not consistent. So I'm just assuming that doesn't matter. Here are the continuity errors I found. To be clear, the continuity in the scene is excellent given how complex the prop is, and this is completely normal for a movie. I'm just showing in case you see a shot that doesn't match something I say. Just know that it could be a continuity error. So I like the overall layout. The way there are 8 puzzles arrayed around the center, and the top layer rotates to show you 4 at a time. It's pretty elegant. This has a definite structure that a lot of puzzle boxes lack. You always know where to look next, and you can sort of see your progress. The individual puzzles are designed in a sort of anything-goes fashion, just whatever would be cool to put into a puzzle box. Since they didn't need to completely build the object, they had a lot of freedom as to what to incorporate. The puzzles wind up being pretty distinct, and they don't really build on each other or relate to each other in any way. The overall structure here is definitely on the linear side. You have to work on one puzzle at a time in a predetermined order until it's solved, and you never revisit anything. Not every design lends itself to a nonlinear structure, but this one does. You could keep the starting puzzle the same, but then on each of the 2 layers, the 4 puzzles all begin open, and you have to solve all 4 of them in any order to complete that layer. It's a little bit more like the plot to a movie that way. And after the introductory scene, you could have multiple plot lines going on that converge back together at the end. For real-world puzzles, I think that nonlinear is generally better when it's an option, but you don't see it very often in fiction, and I think for a good reason. In real life, something like this would take possibly hours to solve, and we, the audience, need to be able to follow it, even when it's condensed down to a montage of just a few minutes. So, if there were multiple puzzles being solved at once, that would make it that much harder for the audience to follow. About the construction, I am by no means an expert on puzzle boxes. I've never made one or even solved one this complicated. I'm always very impressed at what puzzle box designers are able to build, so I'm just making educated guesses here. I'm pretty sure this was not designed as a single physical object. I think they built 3 different props. The starting closed box, the box open to all the puzzles, and the final solved state. They use CGI or some other visual effect to transition between them. The layer 1 puzzles are split while it's folding and unfolding, and the puzzles do not seem designed to handle this. I originally thought that layer 1 and layer 2 had to be two different props as well, but looking at the transition between them, I now think that it's all one object, and what you see here is all or almost all real. There is a little bit of trickery though. There's a cut and the surface goes from spinning anti-clockwise to spinning clockwise. I think they designed it to be able to lift up and start spinning, but not to come down in a certain spot. So to show it coming down, they set it up in the layer 2 configuration and filmed it spinning up, then played that backward. I thought that was a really clever solution, and I'm surprised how easy it is to miss that it changes directions. I also think they didn't build the part that actually detects when any puzzle is solved. Whenever you see a panel opening, it's being triggered manually. That obviously eliminates a lot of the complexity in the construction. Okay, let's go through each of the individual puzzles. Starting puzzle. The box has this repeating wood grain pattern on it. The lids pattern contains a hidden 3D image of an arrow. This points to a spot where there's a hidden button. Push that and you complete this puzzle and open layer 1. The hidden image is what Wikipedia calls an auto-stereogram. These were really popular in the 90s. I had a couple books of them, including this murder mystery in 3D. I thought this was a cool concept, but I don't think they ever made any more of them. Anyway, yeah, at first glance this does look like it could be a stereogram because it repeats horizontally. But is it? There's no reason they would have needed to make a real stereogram of an arrow in order to build the prop, so did they? And the answer is yes. In at least one shot, the lid is actually a stereogram of an arrow. In most shots, we don't get a good enough look to say one way or the other. There are only two good shots of the lid. The first one is here, when Lionel actually sees the hidden image. They do this visual effect to depict what he sees. And the second one is here, during the transformation from layer 2 to the solved puzzle. Here, I've just rotated this one 180 degrees, and this is not a stereogram. It's just a wood grain pattern. For the first shot, I had to do a perspective transform on it because it's at an angle. I tried to line up the corners and edges and overlay it over the second shot. And they are different from each other. I'll go back and forth between them to show that the pattern does shift. Now, this is indeed a stereogram of a downward pointing arrow, pointing to a spot approximately centered and most of the way down. Pretty neat. I see in the credits it says Stereogram Design, copyright 2021, Magic Eye Incorporated, so I guess they commissioned this stereogram from the Magic Eye people. Great touch. I'm really glad they did this. So here it is again if you want to take a look. It's not the easiest thing in the world to see, but pause the video if you want to try. If that doesn't work, you might be able to see it if I flip back and forth between the image at an offset. So that's pretty cool. Were there any clues to this? Well, if you know what to look for, there is a telltale sign that the pattern is a stereogram. And that's here, a horizontal discontinuity in the pattern that doesn't appear on the left. It starts at the horizontal line at the top of the arrow and extends to the right. You can also see it in this shot. Lionel puts his fingers just under it like he's noticing it. I'm not positive, but it really seems intentional. Looking at it from an angle like this is not the best way to view a stereogram. Ideally you'd look face on, so you'd have to look down at it. But I think doing it this way made it easier to follow for the film. And it is possible you can see it in this image too. You just can't focus on the whole arrow at once. The way he's using his finger, though, is actually wrong. With a parallel view stereogram like this one, you want to focus on something farther away, not closer. If he'd done it this way, instead of a raised arrow, he'd see an arrow-shaped hole, which is fine. It would still let you solve the puzzle. It just doesn't match the depiction. There are cross-view stereograms where the finger is the right technique, but as far as I can tell, everything published by Magic Eye Incorporated is parallel view. Of course, if he'd been looking at the box lid from the other direction, it would be inverted. Parallel view would show a hole in the shape of an upward-pointing arrow, and cross view would show a raised upward-pointing arrow. Again, that doesn't affect the solvability of the puzzle. You can solve this looking from either direction. There is another practical issue. The arrow isn't actually in a single place. I said it was here. It's actually in both of these places. Technically speaking, the arrow is defined by the difference between these two regions. Practically what that means, if you were viewing it and you tried to put your finger at the tip of the arrow, you'd see two fingers. And if your left eye saw your finger at the tip of the arrow, your right eye would see your finger in a different place, and vice versa. I mean, you could just choose one or the other. I think that's what they did here based on the following shot. They put the button at the right arrow, which corresponds to the right eye in parallel view. If you had to pick one, the right eye position is probably better since 70% of people are right eye dominant, so more people would guess it correctly. But there's not a perfect solution here. I love this. It's a great idea. Stereograms are a really cool thing to work into puzzles, even if they do come with some practical issues. For one thing, there's not much you can do to hide it. Typically, it's very clear that what you're looking at is a stereogram. This one does a great job of hiding in plain sight. The repeating wood grain pattern works, but it isn't obvious, if that makes sense. Stereograms also work better on a glossy surface where you can see some reflections because it helps you focus on something beyond the surface. So having this be so reflective is another good choice. But if you're wondering, a photograph of a glossy surface like this actually makes it worse, not better. I like this depiction of the illusion. Nothing's ever going to perfectly reproduce the experience of seeing it in 3D, but I think this is good. I don't think I've ever seen this depicted in a film before. I remember the 1995 movie Mallrats featured a stereogram, but I don't think they did anything like this. It does show the arrow lifting up out of the surface, and that's not what it would actually look like. It would never appear to move laterally from your point of view. It looks like it's coming toward you even if you view it from an angle. But yeah, how would you show that on film? So for me, this puzzle is off to a great start. Alright, one puzzle down. They won't all be this long. I had a lot to say about this one. Puzzle 1. The first puzzle on layer 1 is an 8x8 grid with 16 red and 16 blue pegs arranged at the grid intersections. There are grooves in the grid that make it look like you can slide the pegs. There's no indication of which way is up, but you can pick a direction so that the red pegs are mostly in the bottom 2 rows, and the blue pegs are mostly in the top 2 rows. That, in addition to the grooves letting you move horizontally, vertically, or diagonally, if you're at all familiar with chess, this is highly suggestive of a chessboard a couple moves into the game. Now, there's no indication of which peg corresponds to which piece, so you can't say for sure, but by far the simplest possibility is this one, with the red pegs as white having moved 2 pawns, and the blue pegs as black having moved 1 pawn. This is a very famous position, familiar to many chess players, but even if you don't recognize it, you'd be able to tell it's most likely black's turn, and black has a maiden 1, and there's only one way to deliver maiden 1. So, to solve the puzzle, you slide the blue peg that would correspond to the winning move, queen to h4. That's it. A little more about this position, it's the fastest possible checkmate happening on black's second move, and it doesn't really come up in games, because it requires white to basically set up their own mate. So, it's known as the fool's mate. I think almost all chess players have seen this before. It's like well-known trivia that this is the fastest possible checkmate, but even if you've never seen it, it's easy to figure out. I like this puzzle. I think it makes sense. I'd say it's pretty easy. I think most people looking at this would at least think of chess, and if you're familiar at all with the rules of chess, then you can get the answer in just a few seconds. It makes me wonder if you could have used this same idea with a more advanced position, where it wasn't so obvious which pegs correspond to which pieces, but like there's only one way you could assign the pegs to pieces such that there would be a maiden 1. I think it might be possible, but I would certainly expect it to be difficult. So maybe this is really the only position that works for this idea. The script of this movie describes the puzzle slightly differently. All the dialogue is exactly the same, but it says here there are 3 colored marbles. Yeah, I really wonder if they had something else in mind. Puzzle 2. Once puzzle 1 is solved, the mesh screen covering puzzle 2 slides open, revealing a 3x3 grid with a shape of an X or O in each space, 5 X's and 4 O's. There's an F-shaped piece on one side and what looks to be a telegraph key on another side. The solution is to interpret the X's and O's as dashes and dots in Morse code, and they spell out O-U-R. You then have to input the answer in Morse code using the telegraph key. So, what exactly do you input? What is the answer? According to the script, Lionel taps 4 dots and a dash. That's the Morse code for the number 4. I like this, so this is what I choose to believe is the answer. Watching the scene, though, I do not think that's what's shown. He's tapping out while he's reading the letters, which makes me think he's trying to spell F-O-U-R, or maybe just O-U-R. I did try to figure out what he actually taps, just in case there were any hidden messages, but it's surprisingly hard if you don't have a lot of experience with Morse code. I asked my father, who's a ham radio operator, and his best guess was I-N-G-I-E. It's very close to I-N-D-I-E, but I don't think this is a hidden message after all. I found a video on the YouTube channel Unbox Therapy where they opened an official Glass Onion promotional puzzle box that includes this puzzle, and it comes with a hint card. One side honestly kind of looks like it gives away the answer, and the other side has the Morse code alphabet. But this card doesn't have the numbers on it, so the number 4 can't be the answer to their puzzle. I think they're supposed to be spelling F-O-U-R, which is my guess for what it's supposed to be in the movie, too. There are two ambiguities that might arise once you deduce that you're supposed to interpret the X's and O's as dots and dashes. First, which is which, and second, what orientation do you view it from? Like all the puzzles, there's nothing external that tells you which way to look at it from, so EF handles the orientation question. As for whether X's are dots or dashes, I guess you have to go by the fact that FSGK is not a word. In the shot where he inputs the solution, he's not looking at it right side up. From his angle, it gives you GDK. I like this one. I think it's pretty reasonable. I like the fact that it's something different than it appears at first glance. Knowing the solution, it seems pretty easy, but I can also imagine getting stuck on this for a while. The fact that they chose to include such an explicit hint card makes me think it's probably harder than it seems at first. I definitely do prefer the solution being the number 4. My intuition is that this was the original solution and they changed it for the movie for some reason. Maybe they thought it was easier to follow this way. Puzzle 3. The first part of Puzzle 3 is a sliding tile puzzle that solves to the shape of a capital N. Then you realize the box is a compass. You orient the box so that N faces north. The box detects that somehow and the puzzle is solved. The sliding block puzzle is a 4x4 grid. It's similar to the most famous sliding tile puzzle called the 15 puzzle. However, one difference with the 15 puzzle is that some of these tiles are identical to each other. I've labeled the 4 pairs of tiles that look identical to me. I think the puzzle would still be considered solved even if you swapped the 2 B tiles, for instance. One of the A tiles is the missing tile, so if you swap those two, the missing tile would be in the upper left corner. This means that the puzzle will always be solvable no matter how the tiles are arranged. In the classic 15 puzzle where they're all unique, you have a 50-50 chance of being in an unsolvable position. But if you're able to swap any 2 tiles, it's always going to be solvable. If you look closely at the D tiles, though, you can tell they're not exactly identical, so maybe they wouldn't be considered interchangeable. The same is true of the C tiles. The very bottom of the lower C tile is slightly curved to the right. It's so subtle, though, I definitely think these would be considered interchangeable. And also, it's not true in this shot, at least as far as I can tell. These C's and D's actually do look identical to me. You can find the optimal solution to this puzzle from this starting position pretty easily with programming using the A-star search algorithm. Assuming that the pairs are all interchangeable, the quickest solution from the starting position we see is 22 moves. I don't think that's significant or anything, just thought I'd figure it out. One note about the construction, these tiles are not being held in with anything. You can just pick them up and rearrange them. Obviously, you couldn't trust your solvers not to do that in the real world, but it's perfectly fine for the movie. The 15 puzzle is what I call classic for a reason. It's intuitive but challenging, and anybody can solve it given enough time. So if it was just the 15 puzzle by itself, that would be a little boring because it's so famous, which is why I like the part about realizing it's a compass and orienting it so that N faces north. Some kind of feedback that you had unscrambled it correctly would probably be a good idea, just to confirm it. One thing that's very slightly amiss has to do with the orientation of the N. So here's the shot after they rotate it into place. The N is upside down in this shot, but that's not the issue. Assuming the puzzle box has been correctly oriented, which direction do you think is north in this picture? If you said this way, guess again. If you said this way, guess again. If you said this way, you're right. It's outward from the center. At least, I'm assuming. It's not explicitly stated. That makes the most sense to me, that the entire board is like a compass, and there's a panel in each cardinal direction. I was thinking you could go with something like this. I think the suggestion of a compass would be stronger this way, if you could look from the center and see the N right side up. I can definitely see why they didn't do it this way in the movie, though. I think it would just be confusing to viewers. Puzzle 4. This is the last puzzle on layer 1. When the panel opens, a music box mechanism starts playing an arrangement of Bach's Little Fugue in G minor. In the movie, someone says that a fugue is layered over itself. This is a clue that you can reach layer 2 of the puzzle box by pulling up on the wheel in the center. And that's it. I'm not very familiar with music boxes, but the mechanism looks normal to me. I asked my wife, who's a musician, and she confirmed that it's just the beginning of Bach's Little Fugue in G minor. Not surprisingly, what we hear doesn't exactly match this music box. For one thing, it plays for 52 seconds without looping, but the cylinder only looks large enough for about 30 seconds of music. I don't have much to say about this one. This puzzle was definitely designed to make for a good cinematic moment rather than being a solid puzzle per se. The solution they show is really abstruse for a couple of reasons. Associating Bach's Little Fugue in G minor with layering isn't wrong, but there are so many different associations you might make from this piece. It has a catalog number of BWV578, for instance. But then, even if you do figure out that the box is layered like a fugue is, there's nothing to indicate that pulling up on the wheel is what lets you access the next layer. If this was a real puzzle, I would expect the large majority of solvers would either get stuck here or stumble on the solution without actually understanding the clue. So, like I said, this puzzle was chosen because of how it played out on screen. Peeling back layers is a sort of motif of the movie, and they wanted this mind-blowing moment where you realize there's more than meets the eye. You get those moments all the time with real puzzles, of course, but they would require a lot more context to appreciate, so this lets the audience follow along. Once we reach layer 2, the montage speeds up a lot, and we only get a couple seconds glimpse at puzzles 5, 6, and 7. We don't see the solutions to any of them, and I think there is no intended solution. They're not designed to completion. They're designed to look plausibly like puzzles while adding some visual variety to the montage. These 3 puzzles are all very visually interesting. Let's go through what we do know about each of them. Puzzle 5. This puzzle is a colorful geometric pattern. There are straight lines, the spiral, and 2 circles. The rectangular regions are red, green, blue, white, and transparent. One circle is green, and the other is a metallic gold color. There's a 3D aspect. Some of the rectangular regions are higher than the others, and there are some region dividers sticking up in between. You can barely make out another circle beneath one of these transparent rectangles. And finally, this spiral continues inward in this central gap. We only get this one good shot of it before it's solved, and one good shot after it's solved. Here they are side by side after a perspective transformation. I think they look identical. I don't see anything moved or changed. Finally, one character says it's a Fibonacci sequence, and that's all we know about it. Again, we don't see the solution. I don't think there was any intended solution here, but what can we say? The Fibonacci sequence is, of course, a famous number sequence, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. If you take squares whose sides are the Fibonacci numbers, you can arrange them into a rectangle that you can easily draw a spiral on, which is called the Fibonacci spiral. So the Fibonacci sequence is definitely part of the puzzle. I don't see how that would help with solving it, though. I mean, they're already arranged in a spiral, so it's not clear to me what else you would do with that information. You might think to associate each square in the puzzle with a Fibonacci number like this, but it doesn't really work. The spiral is self-similar, so you can't say where you are in the sequence unless you can see the smallest square, and the spiral doesn't end in a square. Okay, so speculation beyond that. The colored rectangles remind me of neoplasticism, a style of artwork. The raised sections make me think of some sort of tangram style puzzle. Like maybe some of the pieces can pop out and you can rearrange them so that they all fit into this empty red region here. Another Fibonacci spiral does appear later in the film. I won't talk about it except to say that I don't see how it informs the solution to this puzzle at all. Yeah, so this one is mysterious. Puzzle 6. Puzzle 6 is an abacus-like arrangement of 5 rods, each of which has 9 beads of a certain color: red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. Along the edge is written cogito plus ergo equals sum, and the words are different sizes and vertically offset from each other. The best view we get comes after all of layer 2 is solved, and all of the beads are on the right. We also see the starting arrangement, and it's much more complicated. And finally, we also see 2 shots of someone pushing beads, 1 yellow bead, and 3 red beads. The Latin phrase cogito ergo sum is, of course, I think therefore I am, from the philosophical writings of René Descartes. It looks like you're free to move the beads however you want, and they never move on their own or anything like that. Yeah, so this looks like something that could be in a puzzle, but again, it doesn't really lend itself to any particular solution. My guess is that you basically need to input a 5-digit code, so you could input 1, 2, 3, 5, 8 by sliding over 1 red peg, 2 orange pegs, and so on. As for what 5-digit code, that's anybody's guess. Descartes was a mathematician known for the Cartesian plane and a few theorems in geometry, but there's no Descartes number that's 5 digits that I know of. Maybe it could be the number of digits in each word in the text, so 61413, counting the plus and equals as 1. I notice that's almost pi backward, but I'm pretty sure that's just a coincidence. The text being offset is certainly suggestive, but I don't really know what to make of it, and some could indicate addition, I guess. But yeah, that's all I got. Puzzle 7. This puzzle is a projector that projects a star pattern. It looks to be directly upward. And that's really all we see. No moving parts, and the end state is just the projector off. No idea how you would input a solution. The projector itself has a few overlapping circles that have these great circle arc patterns with about 25 white stars and 3 red ones. A couple of the stars are at intersections of the arcs. I didn't spend much time on this. I think it's just decoration. It's possible these correspond to the positions of certain real stars somehow, but it would be really hard to match up without some reference point. Here is the projected pattern. I think it's a little bit out of focus, which makes sense. If you're building this, you don't know how far away the solver ceiling is. Ideally, you put an adjustable focus on the projector, but if it is out of focus, it's not too bad. We can see what's going on. There's a whole bunch of stars and 7 constellations drawn. These constellations are real. Some are more recognizable than others, but most stargazers will recognize at least a couple of these, and recognize that they are mirror-imaged to how they actually appear on the sky. So here's the image flipped horizontally and cropped. These constellations are in roughly the right place with respect to each other, and the field of view is centered roughly on Polaris, the North Star. Let's compare it to a star chart that is centered on the North Star. Don't line up perfectly. Some of that's due to the fact that this image was taken from a slight angle with respect to the projector beam, but I think it's more than that. I think they did shift the constellations around slightly, but it's really hard to say for sure. Here are the 7 constellations that are marked, and here are the other nearby constellations that are not marked. For most of these, it makes sense that they're missing since they're farther out. However, Ursa Minor is between Draco and Cepheus, and Cassiopeia is between Andromeda, Cepheus, and Perseus. So Ursa Minor and Cassiopeia are conspicuous in their absence. This puzzle was not in the unboxing video, but there was a constellation puzzle that came with this hint card. These constellations are even more rearranged. Outside of the constellations, I don't think the stars are right. I can't see anything I recognize as Ursa Minor or Cassiopeia, and they're pretty distinctive. It's possible the stars are from a different part of the sky, but I suspect they're just random. Regardless of the puzzle, projecting a star chart is just awesome. Like I said, the purpose of these 3 puzzles was to be visually interesting, and this one definitely qualifies. Again, we don't see the solution for this puzzle, but this time I do have one idea for what it could be. This is essentially the revenge of Puzzle 3 with the compass. If you recognize these constellations, you can tell that the field of view is centered on the North Star. You see where this is going? So what you need to do is tilt your box so that the projector beam is pointing toward the North Celestial Pole. At first I thought it would be really hard, but I guess if you've already oriented your box facing north, then all you need to do is lift the south edge of your box up to an angle that's the complement of your latitude. I think it could actually work as a puzzle. I guess you couldn't solve it if you were too far south, but anywhere in the USA, I think you should be able to. If I had to guess, I don't think this was the intended solution, but maybe it was, and if so, I love it. I wish we could have seen just a little bit more of this puzzle. Puzzle 8. This is the last puzzle, and we do see the solution for it. There's a nugget of about $200 worth of silver, a 2-digit combination input, and a toggle switch. The solution is to turn the combination to 47, which is the atomic number for the element silver, and flip the switch. It's not clear whether you can take the sample out and inspect it. The shape of the nugget doesn't matter for the solution, however, it is the same between different boxes. Here's shots from 2 different boxes, along with a perspective transformation. So, no surprise these aren't actual silver nuggets, they were made into this shape. I definitely like the challenge of identifying a material. That seems like a cool skill to try out. I've never done it, but there are plenty of guides online for identifying silver. The only thing I would think to do differently in real life is to have 3 different substances and then have a 6-digit combination input. There are a few different elemental metals they could have used here, $100,000 worth of rhodium. If you had to pick just one, silver is a really good choice given the purpose of the puzzle. So the puzzle is easy to understand, and it's presented in the film in a way that's easy to follow. This comes just after a series of very quick cuts covering the previous 3 puzzles, and the way this part is paced, I think they wanted to give viewers a chance to catch up to where the characters are before showing the climactic conclusion with the puzzle box's final transformation. I wanted to end with a few comments about the solving process as depicted in this scene compared with real life. It's clearly not intended to depict puzzle solving in a completely accurate manner. The biggest difference I noticed, and I think this is probably true of most depictions of puzzle solving, is nobody makes mistakes. People will discuss wrong answers, but they won't actually try anything until they're sure, unless it's something completely non-destructive like Birdie putting crystals on the box in the opening puzzle. At one point, Claire's husband reaches for puzzle 6, but Claire stops him, and that's the only time we see somebody go to touch something without knowing the answer. Suffice to say, with a puzzle this complex, you would never make it all the way through without ever trying something that doesn't work. And in general, waiting until you know the answer before you touch anything is not a good way to approach puzzle solving. And that has implications for how you design the puzzle. Like in puzzle 1, what would have happened if somebody had made a wrong move? We don't know. In the real world, you'd need to give solvers some way to reset the puzzle or something. When you're designing for a movie, I guess that's one less thing you need to worry about. Another thing they skipped for the montage that would have taken a lot of time is explaining solutions to each other over the phone. If somebody got stuck on the sliding block puzzle, it would be really hard for them to help each other with just verbal descriptions. I found that telegraph keys can be really tricky for people. The difference between a dot and a dash can be very subtle if you're not used to it. In that unboxing video I saw, they had to try several times. Some people would take even longer. That would have been really hard to help someone with over the phone. One thing they included that I really liked was somebody actually explaining how they came to an answer. Typically, a character will just suddenly blurt out the answer in a flash of insight with no evidence that there was any logical train of thought involved. But here in Puzzle 1, Claire notices it's an 8x8 grid, which is occluded as a chessboard. It's minor, but it's a great addition. I'd love more of that. She also calls it a chess endgame, which I don't think chess players would do unless they were being ironic, but on the whole, I thought her dialogue here was very realistic. Claire also displays some critical thinking when she points out that the tic-tac-toe board on Puzzle 2 is already solved. They show a couple wrong guesses, which is great, but again, nobody actually tries them. Some of it was a little strange. In Puzzle 1, Peg says, should we group them by color? And Lionel says, what about size or weight? Like, obviously color, right? At least at first. They're all the same size and they don't look easy to weigh. I do wonder if they changed the design for Puzzle 1 at some point and just didn't update the dialogue, because I think this would have made more sense if the board looked a little different. When they get the N in Puzzle 3, Claire says, does it stand for something? Maybe in one of the other puzzles? Two great questions to ask, very realistic. You see some familiar emotions here, from Duke getting frustrated when his mom blurts out an answer, to Lionel wishing everyone would shut up for a minute so they can hear the puzzle. Oh yeah, in real life, having everyone's music box playing on the group call at the same time would be a huge train wreck. Even if they weren't saying anything, you'd want to take them off speakerphone to hear the music. I like how the characters' different backgrounds and personalities informs how they approach the puzzle. Yeah, I would not want to solve puzzles with this team. They're clearly supposed to be pretty dysfunctional. The end. Overall, I thought this was an excellent scene. Even though the point of the scene was to introduce us to the characters, there was a thoughtful depiction of puzzle solving that had a lot of things to like. Alright, that's my breakdown of the puzzle box scene from Glass Onion. This was my first time trying a video like this, and it was fun. Feedback and suggestions are always appreciated. Thanks for watching.